Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cinema Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, and entertainment and give you my thoughts. If you're joining us live, super happy to have you. If you have any questions or comments during the show at any point, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I will try to get to those before moving on to another topic. If you're watching this after the fact, super happy to have you. If you could, definitely subscribe so you never miss one of these live streams. We do this every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So without further ado, let's jump in. Okay, so let's take a look at the box office from this past weekend. Opening, coming in at number 1, we have the new Ghostbusters film, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. I was actually at the premiere, but I didn't go to the premiere. So I went to go see another movie. I can't remember what it was. I think it was Love Lies Bleeding. And it happened to just be the premiere at the AMC Lincoln Square in Midtown Manhattan, or I guess that'd be like the Upper West Side. But in any case, it doesn't really matter. But so I was there, and so it was just annoying because things were blocked off, and I was just trying to get to my screening. So this brought in about $45 million for the weekend, and it was projected to make 31 to 43. So it overperformed slightly. I don't have up in front of me what the last Ghostbusters film made that this is like a direct sequel to, and I was gonna look it up, but I figured that came out I think like in 2021, and I feel like it would not be fair to compare, or wouldn't really give us a great sense of how this film would do, because 2021 was still like this weird COVID in between zone where not everything was gonna be a success that maybe you would think would be a success, right? But yeah, so this is pretty decent compared to the projections, but again, it was made with a $100 million budget. So it's going to be interesting. I haven't heard great things about it, so it's going to be interesting to see, if there's a big drop-off next week or if it kind of holds out. I've never been a huge Ghostbusters fan. Like, I think I saw the original when I was a kid and didn't really care about it even then. And I think a lot of people have complained, like, it was never this. I think, who's making this? Who is releasing this movie? Sony, right? I think Sony thinks that this is like at the level of like a Star Wars or Indiana Jones or like these other like quote unquote legacy properties. I don't think Ghostbusters. Maybe this is like the millennial / Gen Z in me, and maybe some Gen X or boomers are gonna come out of the woodwork and be like, "No, are you insane?" I feel like Ghostbusters like was never in the same league as any of those other things that I think Sony wants it to be like, right? So they just keep trying this, and like trailers are always have like this weird reverence for Ghostbusters, which itself was very irreverent from what I remember. So I don't know if this is a miscalculation, right? This insistence on really trying to, no pun intended, like bring this franchise back from the dead, right? So it'll be interesting to see how this one does. From my understanding, this one is very nostalgia heavy, featuring, like Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd, like a lot of the original cast, along with the newer cast, led off by like Paul Rudd and the what's his name? Finn Wolfhard, the guy from the boy, who I guess is now a guy, the man from Stranger Things. So yeah, and then just total from this past weekend, it's made about $62 million worldwide. So again, still has a long way to go before recouping its budget. Also opening this week at number 4 is the horror, kind of like Catholic horror film Immaculate, bringing in about $5.4 million for the weekend, and it was only made for I think like less than $10 million. So, if it can kind of have a semi-strong, just couple weeks, it'll be a fairly, decent return. And horror movies are always like this. That's the allure of horror movies, is that you make them really, really cheap, and if they hit, they really hit, and then that percent return is massive, right? I just have to make a little rant. I'm sorry. This has nothing to do with the box office, but so I have not seen the movie. I've heard it's okay, which, considering it looks awful, I think that's a plus, that it's just okay. I presume, I believe the premise is that Sydney Sweeney plays a nun who conceives a virgin birth. And again, I don't know what plot twists ensue, whatever, but presumably the title is in reference to the Immaculate Conception. But the Immaculate Conception often has a lot of misconceptions about it, because people think it's about the conception of Jesus, but it's actually about the conception of Mary and that she was sinless, so the Immaculate Conception. So I'm a little just annoyed that I would imagine this is called Immaculate because it's about like this virgin birth, which is not what the Immaculate Conception is about. But that's really neither here nor there. And then also opening this week at number 6, the horror movie Late Night with the Devil, bringing about $2.8 million. I was going to go see it last week, but I wasn't feeling well, so I'm going to try to see it hopefully in the next week or so. All I really know about it, in terms of what people have been talking about, is people are annoyed that some part of it used some kind of like AI art or something. So, you know, take that for what you will. But this is a pretty modest opening. I'm not sure. I don't have right up in front of me what the budget was for this, but, you know, maybe this can have some legs or whatever. But again, a film like this, you don't expect to really make a bunch of money. So looking at films that are continuing their runs. So Arthur the King, the inspirational sports/dog Mark Wahlberg movie, coming in at number 5 with 4.4 million. So it dropped from 3rd to 5th, and this is its second weekend. So just barely stayed into the top 5, but just barely. Only a 43% drop though. So, you know, this definitely could be a movie that, you know, is inspirational. Like we saw, like what have been the heavy hitters like the past 3 months or even 4 months in terms of box office. Things like Wonka, Migration, Anyone But You. Like films that are more or less fairly conventional. So I think this could have a little bit of staying power. Just considering that it only dropped 43%. And it's made about 15 million domestically or worldwide. So, you know, this isn't awful. I can't remember the budget, but, you know, if it could have some legs, just because it's kind of like almost comfort food for moviegoers, it could end up being a surprise sleeper hit. But also, you know, we're really, you know, it's the end of March. We're about to move into April, and then so many big things are about to come out. I would, you know, it would be very interesting to see how long it stays in the top 10. Just a couple other notes here. Dude, I made this prediction a few weeks. I was wrong last week, but my prediction ended up coming true this week. I had said that following Kung Fu Panda 4's release, which unseated Dune Part 2 in the top spot, I had said that there's a good chance that they'll flip. And because Dune will hold out better and Kung Fu Panda will have a bigger dip. It did not come to pass last weekend, but here it is, happening now. Dune Part 2, holding second place in its 4th weekend, only a 38% drop. And this thing has made about $233 million domestically and $574 million worldwide. So this is already way more successful so far than the original, which again makes sense considering it came out in like that weird 2021 COVID, are we going to theaters, are we not going to theaters kind of moment. And hopefully, because again, if you've been watching this show, you know I think Dune Part 2 is amazing. So it couldn't happen to a better film. I just hope the success keeps going, and it kind of signals to both, not just the industry, but like Warner Brothers specifically, that like people like good movies. You know what I mean? They're not just like, you're not just like selling toothpaste. It is like an art form, right? And then the only other thing of note here is that we have Bob Marley, One Love. Speaking, we were talking about like with Arthur the King, something a little more conventional, but in a good way, at least in terms of its performance at the box office. Brought in about 1.1 million for the weekend. It dropped from 7th to 10th in its 6th frame. I think that reflects how more and more bigger blockbusters, the wrong word, but just bigger things that are going to eat away more of the market share. So that drop from 7th to 10th makes sense. But it's in the 6th frame, so it's been out for more than a month now. It had a 52% drop, but it's made about 95 million domestically and 173 million worldwide. Again, it's annoying, but people like conventional music biopics about famous people that they like. Or know. Not even like, just know. And again, by all accounts, from what I've heard, this movie is okay. It's very this like middle of the road. You know, so it's interesting to see, probably, unless something happens, like one of these other films here, like Cabrini and Love Lies Bleeding, really have huge drops next week, which could happen, but I would not be surprised if Bob Marley exits the box office, after this after this week. Just a comment here. Viviana writes, Dune 2 finally surpassed Kung Fu Panda 4. Yes, that's what I've been saying. I don't know if he made that comment before I said it or after, during, in any case, but yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see again. You're going to have stuff come out that's going to unseat stuff, and I feel like the next couple months are going to be this constant game of musical chairs, in terms of like what's going to have a bigger opening, but then what's going to have more staying power, right? Okay, let's move on here. Just want to give a quick plug. So Cinema and QSO is not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is a Substack newsletter where I write film reviews on new releases. So I just want to give a little plug to some reviews that I wrote this past week that you can go check out. They're basically all more indie films. So we got, there we go. Sorry, I'm mirrored. So over here we got a Turkish film called About Dry Grasses. And then we also have the French film, The Taste of Things. And then over here, the Oscar nominated in the Best for International Feature category, Io Capitano. Io Capitano is great. Taste of Things is nearly great, and About Dry Grasses is good and a little frustrating. So if you want to hear my thoughts, definitely go check that out. You can find that at the link in the description. You can also just go to your web browser and type in cinemanqso.substack.com. So let me just grab a quick drink first. Okay, let's talk about story number 1. So this fine fellow here, if you're not aware, is MrBeast. If you don't know who MrBeast is, I'll get to that in just a moment. But so big news from this past week: Amazon and Prime Video have ordered the reality competition series Beast Games from Jimmy Donaldson, aka MrBeast. So the press release says that the show will, quote, become the biggest reality competition series ever, with 1,000 contestants competing for a $5 million cash prize, end quote. This would make it the biggest payout in TV history, breaking the record that Squid Games, The Challenge, like the reality show version of Squid Games, they originally set the record, or recently broke the record with their $4.56 million payout for the winner. MrBeast will host the show. You know, he will retain creative control. Reportedly getting like $100 million payout for his work. And he wrote we have a quote from MrBeast saying, quote, on YouTube I have to make videos around titles and thumbnails, but on this show I can do whatever I want. I can just make good content, end quote. Kind of speaking to this idea of like how to game, I don't even want to say game, but like how to use the YouTube algorithm to your benefit, oftentimes needing to create, not necessarily, clickbait is like the worst form of it, but even something that's not clickbait, just like very sensationalized titles and thumbnails, especially if you've been following this channel. I've started to do that just a little bit. Try to keep it within reason, but it helps. Literally, the day I did it and changed all the titles and thumbnails, like a huge spike in traffic, right? So, but it sounds like MrBeast is looking forward to kind of, you know, he's getting the payout no matter what, right? So, kind of being able to focus on something and without worrying about like how is this going to play in the algorithm. This show would be exclusive to Prime Video, and The Hollywood Reporter reports, as you would expect the reporter to do. They report that Amazon, in order to get this, won a bidding war against at least one other streaming service. So it's unnamed what streaming service, but it's clear, what this indicates is that there's interest here, that this is not just kind of some strange fringe thing and Amazon's kind of going on a limb. People wanted this. People wanted to work with MrBeast. But who is MrBeast? So I come to this as a foreigner, so to speak. I have never watched a MrBeast video. In a perfect world, that would be part of my research, is watching some of these videos. But I have a full-time job, and I just don't have the capacity to do that. But so MrBeast is a 25-year-old from Greenville, North Carolina. He first posted on YouTube when he was 13. I think like in 2012. And he went viral in 2017 for doing a video where he like counted to 100,000, right? So there's something kind of like weird and off the wall, but you're kind of like, well, what is that? So you're gonna like go see what that is, right? And he became the YouTuber, at least the single YouTuber, as opposed to like brand pages for different companies, right? He became the YouTuber with the most subscriptions in November of 2022, so about a year and a half ago-ish, and currently has 245 million subscribers. You know, it's crazy. I remember when I was a kid, I like to have a badge of honor that I've been on YouTube, watching YouTube, even making stuff for YouTube since probably late 2006, right? And it was created in 2005, bought by Google in 2006. And 2006 is really where it became like what we think of as YouTube. So I've been there since basically the beginning. And I remember it was a big deal when the most subscribed person reached 1 million subscribers. 1 million. That was a really big deal. And MrBeast has 245 million subscribers, right? So it kind of just shows the change over basically almost 20 years at this point, which is crazy. MrBeast told Time Magazine that his channel makes, get this, I wish I could make money like this. His channel makes about $600 million to $700 million a year. But he says that he mostly puts it back into the videos, right? In the production of the videos. He wrote, I keep saying that. He said, quote, I've reinvested everything to the point of, you could claim, stupidity, just believing that we would succeed. And it's worked out, end quote. You think? He employs, and again, this is like not just like just a kid in his room. He employs over 200 people. He built this multi-million-dollar studio in North Carolina. So it's like, the real deal. Like this is not the real deal in the sense that it's not just a kid with like a camcorder in his room. Like he's really leveled up. Kind of what, like, again, he seems to put a lot of this money back into the videos. So like, what are some of his videos? Why do people give a shit, right? So I explained the 100,000, counting the 100,000 one. So from what I've read, his videos, the ones that really went viral in like that 2017 onward era were like those kind of stunt videos. So just like strange, you see the title or the thumbnail and you're like, what? And then you click on it and you want to see, what does that even mean? So examples I found were watching paint dry for an hour, trying to spin a fidget spinner for a day, trying to stay underwater for 24 hours, break glass with 100 megaphones, and then we have a title here for one of the videos, quote, I survived 7 days in an abandoned city, end quote. So just like things like that, right, where you're just like, it makes you lean in, kind of. More recently, his videos have kind of had like a philanthropic angle to them. Recently he did a video where he paid for 1,000 cataract surgeries so blind people could see again, which is like really nice, right? So it's a stunt, but like it's not just a stunt and you're putting all this money in for the stunt. Like the money is actually helping people, kind of, right? And Kotaku even described him as, quote, a philanthropic YouTube creator, end quote. He also had like a Squid Game show of his own on YouTube. Like he kind of turned it into a reality show on YouTube first, and then Netflix kind of like copied his ideas. Like, shit, like he's beating us at our own game, we should do it. He did that and had a cash prize and everything. And I have mixed feelings about things like this. Like, it kind of feels dystopian. And, like, look, I don't really know enough about him. I don't know if he's problematic or canceled or anything like that. But just my gut reaction is, like, nothing against him. From what I've read, if what I have read and understand to be true is true, he seems like a decent guy. Again, he's not necessarily hoarding all this money. It seems like he's really putting it back into the productions. And, there's 200 people who wouldn't have a job without him. So there is something there. But the fact that 1,000 people needed a YouTube personality to pay for their cataract surgeries, I think is just very representative of late stage capitalism and just is an indictment on our society rather than being like this positive feel good story, right? And that kind of just represents my opinion on philanthropy in general. Like, philanthropy is great in a vacuum, but it shouldn't be a substitute for basic social programs, right? And I feel like oftentimes people use philanthropy at best as kind of this idyllic kind of view of the world, and at worst only exists to funnel money out of businesses into nonprofits, or just for the tax incentives, right? So, again, nothing against MrBeast, but just kind of feels like something you would see in like a dystopian movie set like 100 years in the future, where it's like that's how people, that's the point of Squid Game. It's like this dystopian where people are so desperate, the economic situation is so dire that they're willing to potentially die to get all this money, right? But yeah, just going back to this overall deal with Amazon Prime, I think it just reflects again, speaking like I was saying about my experience and the change over time, it shows not only that YouTubers can become successful, but like in what they could transcend that category, right? Which has been difficult for even the most successful YouTubers, kind of making that jump into other forms. That's not to say that, oh, you're not really doing anything important, and the only way you can be validated is if you like get a TV deal or a movie deal. And furthermore, those are good and well received and they make money, right? I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to kind of pit one against the other, but clearly that's something that they want to do, right? And that's something that they want to, that's a success that they want, right? We have a quote here from MrBeast saying, quote, about this show. My goal is to make the greatest show possible, improve YouTubers and creators can succeed on other platforms. I hope to make the YouTube community proud, end quote. And then, so ultimately this raises the question that we will not know the answer to until the show comes out, is will his content translate to different channels, right? And by channels, I mean different distribution modes, right? We have a quote here from Kotaku saying, quote, we will get to see MrBeast's personality and charm, and they put in quotes, charm, will translate to success beyond YouTube kids and teens, aka people who don't have to pay to watch his content on their phone, end quote, right? So they're speaking to this idea that, like, I think there's this false equivalency, especially in the early days of YouTube, where they're like, where people would, business people would look at something like, wow, this thing has 1 million views. If everyone paid $5 to have that thing, that would be $5 million. Well, dummy, they're getting 1 million views because it's free, right? That there is a, you have to kind of look at success on YouTube through a certain lens of, it's more or less free. You pay with your attention, right? You watch ads, and that's how YouTube makes its money, and that's how the creators make their money. And from my understanding, YouTube is still like the best place they have the best kind of revenue sharing model. This might be wrong, but at one time it was not 50-50, but like pretty close. Maybe like 45 for the creator, like 45% of the revenue generated from a video from ads, you get a cut of, right? So just because something gets 1 million views on YouTube doesn't mean if you were to then upload that to Netflix or Amazon Prime, or better yet, ask them to pay directly for it, that it would have the same success, right? Again, YouTube still feels like the best business model for content, right? It's like I said, it's free, but it's still able to make money, and it's kind of like having your cake and eat it too, where a lot of websites, which we'll talk about in the next story, pause on that, websites struggle to monetize something, the thing that they're giving away for free, right? So YouTube, again, the way that they do it, and essentially that's how the internet has basically worked for like the past 20 years, is ads, right? You are not the consumer, you in a sense are the product. And your attention is the product, right? But again, it's free, but it still makes money. And there's a report from Deloitte showing that Gen Z millennials prefer free user-generated content than like subscription video on demand, right? So ultimately, it's like, what does MrBeast get out of this? Because again, his kind of content might be best suited for YouTube, right? So this is a good deal for MrBeast because he's still getting a huge payout up front. So even if this thing flames out, he still walks away with the bag, right? So the question will be, was this a good deal for Amazon? Was it worth this $100 million investment, or did they kind of get did their eyes become bigger than their stomachs in terms of, again, they saw that YouTube success and assumed it would translate to success on their streaming platform. So only time will tell. Okay, let's move on to story number 2. Let me just grab a quick drink. Okay, let's talk about story number 2. So Reddit, the nearly 20-year-old social media / message board / online community platform, Reddit, has officially gone public. It launched its IPO on Wednesday of this past week, on March 20th, and using now the ticket symbol RDDT. Very, very elegant. So if you don't know, what is an IPO? Well, I'm glad you asked. Nobody. I'll explain. So I wanted to find a way to succinctly explain it, and also I'm not a financial person, so I wouldn't say I'm an expert in this. So I went to ChatGPT just to see what it would say. So I typed in, explain what an IPO is in 3 to 5 sentences. And this is what it said. So let's read this out. Let's kind of see, let's make sure it's accurate, right? So ChatGPT says, quote, an IPO, or initial public offering, is the process by which a privately held company transitions to being publicly traded on a stock exchange. To being publicly traded. I'm sorry. The process by which a privately held company transitions to being publicly traded on a stock exchange. During an IPO, the company issues shares of stocks to the public for the first time, allowing investors to purchase ownership stakes in the company. This process raises capital for the company, which can be used for purposes such as expansion, debt reduction, or funding operations. Once the IPO is completed, the company becomes subject to public reporting requirements, and its shares are traded on the open market, where their value can fluctuate based on investor demand and market conditions, end quote. That's a pretty good understanding. So in short, I'm going to summarize the summary. An IPO is essentially when a company that was previously held by private investors is now released on the stock market, and essentially it's like, okay, have at it. And people like yourself or me can buy shares of Reddit. So in a way, you can own Reddit. And I should clarify, this is in no way financial advice. I know it doesn't even seem like financial advice, but I don't want to get into any legal troubles. This is not financial advice. But theoretically, you and I could buy a piece of Reddit, right? So the initial share price was at $34. It was originally estimated to be between $31 and $34, so it was up on that upper end when it finally actually, debuted as an IPO, which was a good sign. The Guardian notes this is the biggest social media IPO in years, because again, social media and tech have kind of had a rocky couple of years, right? And having the shares at $34 a share puts the total value at nearly $6.5 billion. This is a drop from the $10 billion valuation in 2021 that Reddit got in 2021 during a private fundraising round. And by fundraising, I don't mean like charity, but like literally raising funds, right? Going to private investors, right? But then on Thursday, the next day, it popped like 48%. Which increased its market cap to like $9.5 billion. So much closer to that original $10 billion valuation. It dipped on Friday, so I was like, oh shit, I don't have a lot of money. I did buy a share. I bought $1 worth of shares. It dipped like 10%, so I was like, okay, let me just get out. I don't really have the money. It went up like 30% today. So I just have awful luck. But so this is just very interesting and exciting. For Reddit to finally be taking this move, right? In terms of Reddit's history, it was founded in 2005, and again, if you've ever been on Reddit, you know this, that it's set up, unlike things like Facebook or Twitter, Instagram, it's set up like classic message boards. Like from the early days of the internet, like the 90s, and to a point to the 2000s, but I think really more or less disappeared, except for like hardcore people who are almost more committed to the message board than the topic that the message board is covering. And these different communities are called subreddits, right? And these subreddits are largely moderated by volunteers, right? People who are just passionate about the topic or the community, and they're not getting paid for it, right? The company was sold to Condé Nast in 2006 for $10 million. And it was later spun out of Condé Nast due to stagnation. The New York Times notes, right, that they made that observation. So monetizing Reddit has always been difficult for a few reasons. So number one, content moderation, right? Initially, it was a cesspool, right? It was very much, free speech absolutist, anything goes. Often kind of spoken in the same breath as things like 4chan, where, I'll just speak from experience. Like, I remember, I think it was like in middle school or high school. Even if it was in high school, it's still awful. Like, there was a Reddit r/watch people die. And you could find, and in it, people would post videos of actual people dying. It was awful, right? And that was like what Reddit was for a long time. It also had perfectly acceptable, squeaky clean, family-friendly stuff, but it had that as part of it, and it had this reputation. Eventually, they put a lot more emphasis on content moderation. It really helped change this image. And the past decade has really been spent trying to build up its ad business, right? Which is, from what I understand, a huge majority of the revenue Reddit is currently bringing in, right? So, from my understanding, Reddit advertising is great, as is all digital advertising and social media based advertising, because you can really target the audience. Whereas, 50 years ago, you had to kind of hope, like, okay, the Nielsen ratings say that 35 to 50-year-olds watch this show at 10 o'clock. So we think they might watch it, so let's show this ad for beer or whatever it might be, right? It was very, not necessarily ineffective, but just it was a lot wasteful, maybe would be the word, right? Where it's like you need to make a lot of blind decisions and hope something sticks. Whereas with like Facebook and Reddit, you can really target, especially Reddit, because if you want to target Star Wars fans, well, there's an r/Star Wars, and there might be a few other more specialized Star Wars, right? But you can target those, so your ads are showing up when people are in those subreddits, right? So that's obviously a huge opportunity for growth. Again, still more work needs to be done in terms of content moderation, because advertisers don't want to advertise next to hate speech or videos of people dying, right? So that's going to need to be something that continues to improve. And a recent development in terms of how it's making money is selling and licensing out the data from users to, and what people are talking about, to hedge funds and Wall Street groups, and recently has been selling conversation data to train LLMs, or large language models. So things like ChatGPT, right, which we mentioned before. So in the future, if I were to ask ChatGPT what is an IPO, it could very well be pulling, obviously it's a synthesis, not literally just like taking something verbatim, theoretically, but sometimes it doesn't do that. In the future, it might use a Reddit discussion about IPOs to give me an answer, right? And this is a huge get, for, I think it was Google that made this deal, right? Because if you think about it, because these large language models need text, they need information and data, and it needs things to ingest, study, to get better. Well, Reddit has over 1 billion posts, 100,000 subreddits, and about 73 million active daily users every day. So there is just a treasure trove of just human text that these LLMs can use to get better and better. And people, and it's not just like, okay, you have all that, but how good is it? I mean, people really, like, Reddit as a brand, among all the things I've listed, people trust it because the people having these conversations care about whatever they're talking about. So, if it's an opinion-based kind of argument or discussion, that might be a little bit different, but oftentimes, and I'll do this, a lot of times people, if they're looking at something on Google, they'll add Reddit to the end of the search, right? This idea that Reddit is more authoritative than some other SEO-driven search results, or companies that are paying to be like at the top of the Google search results, right? People want quality answers, and usually Reddit's a place to go, right? So overall, the company is growing, but it's not yet profitable, right? So the question will be, will there be kind of a bubble the way there were with these other companies where it's all about growth as opposed to profit? So we'll have to see. But again, so far the stock has done very well in less than a week. I think it's gone up. Well, actually, let's go on right now while I have us all here. So Reddit is trading right now at $65.90, and it debuted at $34. So it has gone up about 93%. So if you bought in on that first day and bought $100 worth of shares, you would now have a $93 profit, right? So who's to say? Again, I bought another $1 worth of shares this afternoon. I'm surely it's gonna tank tomorrow, because that's my luck. But in terms of this IPO and going public, a lot of Reddit users seem resistant to the idea, and sometimes more than seem, like they've been very vocal about it, right? A lot of users are concerned that market pressures are going to force Reddit to make misguided changes, right? Ultimately, when you're a public company, you are somewhat, to a certain degree, beholden to shareholders, right? Every company says, like, oh, we're still going to, have our vision and ambition, wherever. When you are publicly traded company, and doing something would help the stock price go up by a substantial amount, you're going to do that thing, right? It's called like a fiduciary responsibility. It's your job as, the CEO of Reddit to increase shareholder value for for investors, right? So people are concerned that it's going to compromise the quality of Reddit as a website. Nevertheless, though, Reddit did allocate a small portion of the IPO and set it aside for what they called super users. So they allowed some of the most active users on Reddit, these people who are volunteering to moderate these subreddits, they gave them early access to buy in at that cheaper price at $34. So if people did that and they put a decent amount of money in, I mean, that's a pretty good return for all those years of volunteering for free, right? So kind of in summary, what does this mean, right? So this is a pretty good signal, again, for other potential tech companies looking to go public, right? There were only about 100 IPOs total in 2023, and New York Times notes that this is only a quarter of the amount in 2021. So that would be like 400. So there's a lot of hesitation, especially as we've, the stock market has been struggling because of interest rates, but as those start to come down, I think more companies, especially tech companies, will be more comfortable going public because they think there's a path to some really strong gains, right? And for a point of comparison, Instacart, which is not social media, but it's like another kind of tech company, went public last year, and it's up about 60% year to date, so just in the past couple of months, right? So only time will tell what's going to happen with Reddit, but knowing my luck, it will drop on tomorrow, and then I'll sell my shares because I'm an idiot, and then it will go up 8,000% on Wednesday. Okay. Let's move on to story number 3. Let me just grab a quick drink. Okay. All right, so who are we looking at here? This is Dan Schneider. He, New York Times once called him the Norman Lear of children's television. He is the creator and producer and writer of a bunch of Nickelodeon shows from the 90s and 2000s, even into the 2010s. So a few, that list would include, but is not limited to, things like All That, Drake and Josh, Kenan and Kel, The Amanda Show, iCarly, Victoria, Zoe 101, all of those kinds of shows. Dan Schneider was kind of behind them all, right? But he has kind of been in the public conversation as of late because of a docuseries released on Discovery called Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV. And the show is basically, I think it's like a 4-part docuseries. I've been meaning to watch it. I've actually heard pretty good things. I was a little concerned about it because it seemed a little sensationalized, because it's about essentially highlighting all of these issues that were happening at Nickelodeon during these times, particularly when it came to things like sexism and racism and, potentially people not being in like a super great work environment, sometimes even toxic or hostile or even inappropriate. And, Dan Schneider has always been at the center of those conversations. Recently, the show was already getting a lot of attention, but in its, I think, second or third episode, Drake Bell revealed that he had been abused by a dialogue coach on I think it was like on the set of All That. A dialogue coach, Brian Peck, who's also an actor, I believe, and I actually did a whole video about this, if you want to find that on my channel. But specifically, though, as the final episodes of the docuseries aired, a lot more attention was put on Dan Schneider, again, who left Nickelodeon in 2018, kind of during like that Me Too era, but no specific allegations ever quite emerged. But there's always been this stink around him and the whole thing, right? So here's like what the show has alleged. And people in the show who were being interviewed said this in the show, but I've also just said this in general. So one of the issues was a very toxic work environment. So reportedly Schneider had major temper issues that would just explode over like really minor things. And we had some testimony is the wrong word. It wasn't illegal in any sense, but kind of some testimony here from Amy Berg, who was his former assistant. She wrote for All That, which was like almost like teen SNL. It was like a teen sketch comedy show from like the late 90s. And supposedly she became a shut-in after working with him for only a year. And we have a quote from her saying, quote, people were asking her, if he had done anything inappropriate, and she said here, quote, "What I can confirm is that he is, pardon my French, a fucking asshole. A psychological tormentor. He introduced me to panic attacks, and the stress of working for him caused me to develop a significant heart arrhythmia." End quote. So, clearly Amy Burke did not have a great experience and blames him for later medical issues, which, I would not be surprised if that's the case. We also have reports here from these two writers who worked with him, Christy Stratton and Jenny Kilgan, who supposedly had to share a salary. That Schneider would only hire them if they basically agreed to split a normal salary. Which he later claimed that that's a very normal thing in the industry. It wasn't because they were two women. Sometimes I've seen it with two men. I've seen it with a man and a woman. But why did they have to share a set? Were they a writing duo? Were they partnered? Did they even know each other? I don't know. But just that's obviously not a good situation to be in. And then there's also, of course, the inappropriate conductiness of it all. So reportedly, he would leave pornography on his computer screen when people would come into his office. He also once told a writer, which he later said was in jest, but it's still really not appropriate. Told a writer he'd put one of her sketches in the show if she gave him a massage. And what is it with these creeps? Sorry, I'm not trying to be judgmental. I'm trying to be fair here, but what is it with these creeps and massages? Why do they think, that's the way I'll get Harvey Weinstein did it? I just don't understand it. What is it with the massages? And what I'm not trying to make light of this, but why in what universe is that a good strategy? If you're not, unless you, of course it's weird. Of course it's coercive. In what universe is that normal? Unless you're going into it knowing that this is not normal, but it's what suits your desires or whatever it is, right? And then also something that people have noted for years is just all of these innuendos and sexually coded jokes in these shows, presumably for children, right? The big one people always point to is feet. Feet. The guy clearly has a feet fetish, or maybe he does or doesn't, I don't know. But the amount of jokes relating to feet on these shows, and people sometimes licking feet or sucking on toes or having chocolate sauce poured on feet or whatever it might be, it's just very strange. And I think, So there's all these things. Again, this isn't necessarily new information, or rather the information is new, but the general kind of insights and the takeaways, we've known this for years now, right? So what is Schneider's response, right? So initially, so he's pretty tight-lipped. He doesn't make a lot of public statements. So initially, a representative of him released this statement saying, quote, "Dan expected and asked a lot from his teams. They worked long hours and consistently made successful shows. In the challenges of production, Dan could get frustrated at times, and he understands why some employees found that intimidating and stressful. But he also knows some people did not have a positive experience, and he's truly sorry for that. Dan knows he should have done better and feels awful about anyone who saw him at his worst instead of his best," end quote. No mention about the inappropriate conduct there, but reading this, I'm okay, that's all well and good, but why is a representative putting out a written statement saying this? Why doesn't he just speak out and apologize? But then that's exactly what he did. So if you see this other picture here, this is a more modern picture of him that surfaced recently. Surface is the wrong word, but he eventually spoke out directly in a 19-minute interview. With, of all people, I forget the actor's name, but the guy who played Tebow from iCarly, the guy who worked across the street at the smoothie place. Or maybe it wasn't the smoothie place, or whatever it was. I don't know why he's interviewing him, but in any case, in the video, I have not watched it, but from my understanding and what I've read, he seems fairly apologetic and emotional. From what I understand, it is defensive to a certain level, but from my understanding, this is not a video when YouTubers do something really bad and they make the obligatory notes app apology. It feels very hollow, or worse, it's just them being I did nothing wrong and here's why, blah 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 blah. From what I understand, this is a Dan Schneider who seems fairly remorseful. Now, whether if he's really remorseful or he just is remorseful because people are calling him out on it remains to be seen, right? But we have some quotes from him here saying, quote, "Watching over the past 2 nights," referring to the show, was very difficult. Me facing my past behavior, some of which are embarrassing and that I regret. I definitely owe some people a pretty strong apology. End quote. You think? We also have a quote here. He said, quote, "When I watched the show, I could see the hurt in some people's eyes, and it made me feel awful and regretful and sorry. I wish I could go back, especially to those earlier years of my career, and bring the growth and the experience that I have now, and just do a better job and never ever feel like it was okay to be an asshole to anyone ever." End quote. But that being said, and again, he doesn't seem to address the inappropriateness. I think I didn't write down the quote, but he talked about, sometimes like with the massages and all this stuff, like I shouldn't have done that, full stop. So again, that's good if you're owning up to it at the very least. He also talked about like the including of like inappropriate or like maybe innuendo-y things into the show. And his argument was kind of like, we were just trying to do things that kids found funny. And they didn't, and kids don't look into it or see certain things like that in that way. Right? If they see you sucking on a toe, they just think it's hilarious. And he's like, but that being said, and then he also kind of passes the buck. He's like, well, there was a lot of people who reviewed every script and every joke. So, if someone had said it was a problem, we would have cut it. So he's also kind of passing the buck there. And he also, this isn't so much him rejecting comments people have made, but rather saying like, okay, yeah, that's true, but here's this good stuff I did. So he talks about, his comments seem to suggest, as he would like to present it, that he was a champion of his child stars and their safety. So he talks about being there for Drake Bell when he was having his trial. And again, I highly recommend you go check out that other video of mine. But a big issue with that was that the accused was fairly popular in those acting circles. So he kind of convinced a lot of people that he was innocent. And at the trial, a lot of stars came in support of Brian Peck, right? Whereas Dan Schneider was really there for Drake Bell. Supposedly. He also claims he wrote Drake Bell's mother's speech for the trial that she made for the jury. He also talked about helping Amanda Bynes when she was trying to separate from her parents. People have always talked about that they've had an affair and he got her pregnant and she had to get an abortion and she was like 15 or 16 or whatever. I can't speak to any of that. There's not a lot of evidence for that, but again, that seems kind of like a coded defense of like those rumors being like, I was trying to be there for her because she was, a kid in a really dangerous situation. I was trying to help her out as best I could. We have this other quote here from Schneider saying, quote, "I can tell you why it hurts really bad for me. I was green." And if you don't know, green just means like you're new to an industry, right? "I was scared. I was excited. It meant the world to me that I was getting these opportunities. And I went in and I got lucky because my first couple experiences were fantastic. And the fact that I didn't pay it forward to every employee that walked through my door, it hurts my heart because I should have. And I wish I could go back and fix that." End quote. Well, you can't, right? So, it's good that you're apologizing, but a lot of the damage has been done. But again, he seems, at least from these comments, he seems genuinely remorseful. But again, it could all be a ruse. I don't say I shouldn't use the word ruse because that really implies some kind of like mischievous or malicious, as intent under the surface. But I don't know. I feel like if with all of Me Too, if he had really done something really, really bad, like actually sexually assaulted somebody, I think that would have come out at this point. He's no longer at Nickelodeon. His social and cultural cachet have completely plummeted. I feel like if he had done something, and this is not to excuse this other stuff where it's like, oh, well, at least he didn't sexually assault anybody. That's not what I'm saying. But I feel like if he had done something of that level, it would have come out at this point, especially with a show like this. Discovery would have ate that shit up and people watching it would have eaten that shit up. So, it's good to see that at least some words of remorse and contrition are being had. But again, does that really, solve anything? That's up for debate. I would say maybe not. Okay, let's do story number 4. Let me grab a quick drink. Okay, let's talk about story number 4. So, Wall Street Journal, the Wall Street Journal reports that Apollo Global Management has put up a $11 billion bid to buy Paramount's film and TV studios. This is higher than the company's current market cap of about $7.7 billion. But this is strictly Paramount's film and TV and direct TV studios. So this would not include television stations that they own, but that are not technically Paramount TV productions. So this purchase would not include things like CBS, BET, Comedy Central, Nickelodeon, MTV, Paramount Plus, or Pluto TV, right? It would really just be for that film and the direct TV production that they do themselves. So who's Apollo Global Management? So it's a private equity firm, and they have a history of getting involved in media and media related things. So they purchased the owner of American Idol, CKX, which I guess is like a production company. They bought that company in 2011. They also purchased Yahoo from Verizon in 2021. And over the years, they've held stakes previously in companies like Barnes & Noble, Cox Media Group, Legendary Entertainment, Redbox, and Sirius Satellite Radio. So again, they have a pretty good portfolio, both past and present, right? I've done stories on this channel about Paramount potentially being sold. Highly recommend you go check those out. So Apollo is not the only potential suitor, if you will. There are other alternatives. So the one that I made a video about, Byron Allen, who's a producer, runs the company Allen Media Group. I think he owns the Weather Channel, like things like that. He placed a $30 billion bid, but for the whole thing, from my understanding. There's also Skydance Media, who wants to buy National Amusements, which is the parent company of Paramount. And there was also talks that maybe Paramount would merge with Warner Brothers Discovery, but that seems to have kind of gone by the wayside. There's also talks that they might do a streaming joint venture with Comcast, which is NBC Universal and their streaming service Peacock. And, the Hollywood Reporter here notes that Apollo may have an upper hand over all of those since financing is, quote, unlikely to be a problem, end quote. As opposed to these other companies that are media companies themselves, whereas Apollo is just another level of money, right? They just have way better access to capital to make such a purchase happen. It seems like the market agrees, because after the news of this came out, Paramount shares surged about 12%. But then they declined after news that Sherry Redstone, who basically is the majority stakeholder in National Amusements, the parent company of Paramount, supposedly Sherry Redstone is not interested. Here's a picture of her here wearing a great polo kind of thing. Okay, we're kind of matching today. She's not interested, apparently. Because again, Apollo just wants the film and direct TV production. And she would prefer to keep the company together, right? And of all the different suitors, it seems like Skydance Media, which I think is owned by David Ellison, whose father, Larry Ellison, was like a famous private equity guy. That seems to be her preferred choice, because again, Skydance Media would buy the whole thing. It wouldn't be kind of selling it off for parts, right? And again, this kind of just raises these overall questions: is what is Paramount's future? And I think the answer to that is we don't know. Again, will it be sold for parts? Clearly, Apollo wants to do something like that. And you could, theorize or visualize a scenario where it's like, okay, Apollo could buy the film business, and then maybe Warner Brothers buys the streaming angle, and then NBC or whatever, or one of the other studios buys CBS, and they all kind of get separated, right? But a lot of analysts think that wouldn't really be a good idea. We have a quote here from an analyst, David Joyce, saying, quote, "We think there's too much interconnectivity between the film and TV IP, and for that matter, between TV and studios and the recently segmented DTC, or direct-to-consumer divisions." That'd be like their streaming. There's been too much interconnectivity of all what I just said for Paramount Global to be sold in pieces. We think it would be value destructive, end quote. And then other analysts have said, quote, "The rest of the company may appear hollow," end quote. So there's obviously a lot of things under this Paramount umbrella, but these analysts are saying that, the film, Paramount Pictures is this century-old institution. So Paramount, without Paramount Pictures, there is quite a bit still there on paper, but it just kind of, the optics feel like it's just like like they said, it would appear hollow. It would be value destructive. It would actually lower the value of all those other things. Because what's the point of getting Paramount Pictures, the film studio, but not the streaming service? So what's going to go on the streaming service, right? I guess the CBS stuff and the MTV stuff and all that. But I'm semi in agreement with Sherry Redstone here. With something like Disney, you could see a lot of their assets that they are kind of maybe considering spinning off or selling off to someone else or merging them with something else. That makes a little bit more sense because Disney has control over so many different kinds of things, whereas Paramount, they all seem very interdependent on one another. So, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, but I'm not sure what the future is for Paramount. But again, the fact there have been all of these suitors, potential buyers, I think just speaks to, it's not looking good for Paramount, right? Like the fact that no one's trying to buy Disney, as far as we know, because Disney's so valuable. So if people are trying to buy Paramount, that itself, on one hand, says, oh, people want it. But on the other hand, I think people are thinking, let's get it because it's cheap and it's undervalued and we can make it worth more. But the corollary of that is like, okay, so it's not worth a lot now. So it's just a kind of a shame to see this studio that has a lot of access to IP. In a perfect world, people would just make good movies. But, from a purely business standpoint, there's a lot of IP here that can do really well. They just need to figure out how to, capitalize on it. Okay. Let's move on to story number 5. Let me just grab a quick drink here. Okay. So this is the second week in a row where I am doing a political story for story number 5. Okay, so Candace Owens, pictured here, right-wing media personality, is leaving the Daily Wire. She said, quote, I think she tweeted, she said, quote, "The rumors are true. I am finally free," end quote. So who's Candace Owens? So Candace Owens, like I said, a right-wing media personality, kind of her bread and butter is, because the right wing, at least in the United States, but really all over the world, is, definitely not a monolith. But she is certainly not like a Reagan era fiscal conservative, right wing media personality. She is very much a culture warrior, right? Very much like the hot button issues that divide people into camps, right? To give, to kind of support that, here we have, she was the former comms director for Turning Point USA. So if you don't know what Turning Point USA is, it's like almost like a young Republicans club. Like it was a organization that would be all these different campuses, including NYU. But I don't know what kind of membership they had at NYU, but essentially very kind of Trump era conservative youth. And funny enough, I think like the valedictorian at not the NYU at large graduation, which I skipped and sold my tickets. Sorry, I know I wasn't allowed to, but I needed money. But the Tisch specific one, the Tisch School of the Arts, the one at Radio City, our valedictorian's the wrong word, but like the student that made a speech was actually part of Turning Point USA, and her speech, while not super right wing, had weird undertones of that about like safe spaces being silly, and then like God bless America and all this stuff, and then it was afterwards people realized, and everyone on Twitter was just like roasting her, right? But anyway, so that kind of gives you a sense of like Candace Owens' background, right? And I think during 2020, that election in 2020, she launched what she called the Blexit campaign. So kind of like a spin on Brexit, trying to get black voters to leave the Democratic Party. Her, she is a black conservative. So, her kind of understanding is that the Democratic Party uses, the African-American community for their own purposes, which the problem with people like Candace Owens is like she's kind of right, but the problem is that she draws she takes the wrong lessons away from that, right? Whereas I'm more like on the more left-wing side. Her argument is like, oh, the Democrats, they don't care about you. Come to the Republicans, we'll care about you, which just is historically just a little dubious there. So the Daily Wire, if you're not sure what the Daily Wire is, it's a conservative news website and media company. It was co-founded by Ben Shapiro, who's pictured here. Classic Ben Shapiro, the kind of guy who's going, and arguing with college students, and this idea about like debate and free speech, and we all have to, it's all about like they're not intellectually honest, and the facts don't care about your feelings is like the classic thing that he would say. Facts don't care about your feelings, which is weird because whenever I have conversations with conservative people, usually they don't like the facts, and then I'll say the facts don't care about your feelings, and they'll be like, whatever. And Daily Wire it's not just conservative, like has been very problematic. It has promoted anti-LGBTQ content, famously with I forget his name. Is it Dan Walsh or something like that? They released like a full-length documentary called "What Is a Woman?" And the idea is to, cherry pick, man on the street interviews with young people, or just anyone asking what's a woman, and basically being like, checkmate liberals and your gender ideology and all this stuff. So what does this have to do? What does Candace Owens and Daily Wire have to do with one another? So she joined the team in 2021 following that election, and her kind of her rising to prominence, where she was in a pretty comfortable position. She fit kind of right in. But recently there's been a rift, particularly between her and Ben Shapiro over the war in Israel against Hamas and what's going on in Palestine. So this is where things get interesting, right? So if you watch my video from last week, you know where I stand on this whole thing, this whole situation in Israel. We have a quote here from Owens saying, quote, "No government anywhere has a right to commit a genocide, ever. There is no justification for a genocide. I can't believe this even needs to be said or is even considered the least bit controversial to state," end quote. So, out of context, I'm like, okay, retweet, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's how I feel. And this is what I was talking about, where it's like you have certain, you reach similar conclusions, but or rather you both share a set of facts, but then you draw the wrong conclusions, right? So it's similar with, let's take like the war in Ukraine, for example. You have people on the super far right saying like, oh, we shouldn't be supporting Ukraine because they have like this weird fascination with Putin and authoritarianism in Eastern Europe. And then you have the Democrats being more like, no, we have to support Israel and democracy and all this stuff, right? People on the left don't like the war in Ukraine, not because we don't care about Ukraine, but because it's, again, like I talked about with Israel, it's a very cynical support. It's more, we don't give a shit about Ukraine. We care about thwarting Russia. And we're spending all this money giving them weapons when we're not helping our own people here, right? So that's something that me and Tucker Carlson agree on, that this is a war that is dubious, but we then draw very different conclusions, right? So Owens here saying this stuff like no government has a right to commit a genocide. I'm like, okay, great. But of course then it devolves. So she has embraced conspiracy theories about October 7th, and she liked a tweet advancing an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that Jews were, quote, drunk on Christian blood. And this is kind of, she represents the worst parts of this conversation in the United States, where you can criticize Israel as a political entity, and that is really, at least in my opinion, I know a lot of people might disagree, they're on both sides of this, that is not necessarily, or really at all, a condemnation or indictment of Jewish people or Judaism, right? But here it's like, you don't have to, like the first part of what you said makes sense. You don't need to then make it anti-Semitic and that Jews are drunk on Christian blood. It's just insane. So Shapiro has called her comments, quote, absolutely disgraceful and, quote, disreputable. And at one point she was complaining about something on Twitter. And he replied to her tweet, basically more or less just saying, by all means quit. Like, if you don't, just quit. And she clearly has. Again, there's not necessarily any sign that she was fired. From my understanding, that due to the contract, they were like, we're not going to fire her unless she's breaking the law or is violating her contract in any way, because ultimately they care about free speech, right, as they would say. So this seems to be a decision on her part, but it's just interesting to see, again, the fracturing within the conservative and the alt-right movement. Because really it's the alt-right movement, which is very different, again, than like my father, right? Like your father, the kind of the classic neoliberal 80s Reagan style Republican. That is no longer the dominant kind of strain in the American right. You know what I mean? So this, I think, just shows kind of like what we talked about last week with my video about Jonathan Glazer's speech at the Oscars talking about the war in Palestine. You know, like how that showed a divide in Hollywood, this issue is now highlighting a divide within, theoretically, a political coalition. Why am I talking about this on this film show? Well, because it's a media company, right? So it's going to be interesting to see, like, okay, how is she going to parlay this? Is this going to help her career in terms of getting her brand out there? Or will it be like Tucker Carlson getting fired from Fox and just being kind of now really on the fringes and no one really hears from him anymore? But only time will tell. Okay. So let us start to kind of wrap things up here. So in terms of upcoming releases, we have here Godzilla and what's it called? Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire. This is the next installment in these like rebooted American Godzilla and King Kong movies. It's projected to make about 43 to 52 million. Again, I don't remember offhand what the last movie did, but again, that came out like during that weird period in COVID, so I don't know if it's a great comparison. I probably will not be seeing it because I have not seen any of the other ones. Probably don't need to have, because these movies are really just about two giant monsters punching each other and punching other stuff. But I would like to have like that context. All I can say is it probably will not be better than Godzilla -1, which is an incredible movie. You should all watch it. Okay, so I just want to give a few quick plugs before wrapping up. I have another YouTube channel called Peter Squared, where it's my opportunity to talk about topics related to film, media, entertainment in a more written video essay format. The video we have up is called A Closer Look at Frozen, where I break down the Disney film Frozen and take a look at what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between, featuring these two kind of cartoon versions of myself, like younger and older. I'm always mirrored. I always get confused. Younger and older versions of myself. Highly recommend you check that out. You can find it in the description. Again, that's at Peter Squared. I also want to plug a podcast I do with my fiance Viviana, where we pick a film franchise, and each episode we go through every film in that franchise: the good, the bad, and the ugly. Right now we're doing the Batman franchise, and our most recent episode is for the animated Batman film, Batman Soul of the Dragon, which is like an animated kung fu Batman movie, which is kind of interesting. So you can check that out. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can see from these logos here. You can find the link in the description. You can also find us on YouTube at Franchise Podcast. You can, if that's your preferred way to listen to podcasts, you can find us on YouTube. And then one final plug, like I said early in the show, Cinema QSO is not just a YouTube channel. It started as, and still is, a Substack newsletter where I write, I share written reviews of newer films coming out. It's, a lot of fun if you're interested to kind of hear my thoughts in a more prose kind of perspective, as opposed to my word salad and rambling that I usually do on this show. So highly recommend you check that out. It would really be a huge help. You can find the link in the description below. And you could also just find us at cinemanqso.substack.com. That's it for this week's Notes on the News. Thank you so much for those of you who joined us, or if you're watching after the fact, thank you so much. Please don't forget to subscribe and like, and I challenge you all to share my channel with one other person. After, if you could do right now, because if we have one or two people watching and they all share it with at least one other person, that's two more people who potentially will watch the show. So if you could all just share it with just one other person, that would really be a huge help. I'm Peter Mancuso, and hope you have a good rest of your night and a good rest of your week, and I'll talk to you later. Peace out.